The massive space station hung in the void like a metal flower. Ships from dozens of worlds docked at its arms. Inside the main chamber, creatures of all shapes and sizes gathered around the speaking platform. Ambassador Sarah Chen sat in the corner with the other human representatives. Her small group looked tiny compared to the giant lizard-like Veltarians, or the floating gas clouds of the ethereal beings. The humans had been members of the Galactic Council for 3 years now, 3 long years of being ignored and pushed around. Sarah listened as the current speaker droned on about trade routes. Her translation device worked hard to turn the aliens' clicks and whistles into words she could understand. Around the chamber, other species made their own sounds of agreement or disagreement. The Veltarians were the real power here. They had been running things for hundreds of years. Their leader, HFY, was a massive creature with 6 arms and armor-like skin. When he spoke, others listened. When he made decisions, they became law. Today was no different. HFY rose from his seat and walked to the speaking platform. His heavy footsteps echoed in the chamber. The other delegates fell silent. "Fellow council members," HFY said, his voice deep and commanding. "Today we must discuss the matter of the Outer Spiral territories." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. The Outer Spiral was where humanity had built several colonies. Families lived there. Children went to school there. It was becoming a real home for thousands of humans. The hegemony of Veltar has discovered rich mineral deposits in this region. HFY continued. These resources are vital for the continued prosperity of the Council. Therefore, we have decided that the current inhabitants must be relocated. Sarah's pen stopped moving on her notepad. She looked up at HFY with careful attention. The human colonies will be given 60 standard days to evacuate, HFY announced. We will provide basic transport assistance, of course. The chamber filled with the sounds of approval from various species. The Aquatic Confederation made happy bubbling noises. The crystal-like collective rang out musical tones of agreement. Nobody spoke up for the humans. Sarah stood slowly. Around her, the other human delegates shifted nervously. She walked to the speaking area, her footsteps quiet compared to HFY's heavy ones. "Honored delegates," Sarah said, her voice calm and steady. "While we appreciate the Council's consideration of our colonies, perhaps we could discuss other options. The colonists have built homes there. They have families, businesses, entire communities." HFY's mandibles clicked together in what Sarah knew was laughter among his people. "Ambassador Chen, surely you understand that the needs of the many outweigh the comfort of the few? Your species is still new to interstellar politics. You will learn that compromise is necessary." "We understand compromise," Sarah replied, still smiling politely. "We've been doing quite a lot of it since joining the Council. But this affects 50,000 human lives. Then I suggest you begin the relocation process quickly," HFY said dismissively. "Unless, of course, humanity wishes to contest this decision through the proper legal channels." The threat was clear to everyone in the room. The Council's legal system moved incredibly slowly. A formal challenge could take decades to resolve. By then, the Veltarians would have strip-mined the entire region. Sarah nodded graciously. "We'll need to discuss this with our government, naturally." "Of course," HFY said, "but the timeline remains firm, 60 days. As the session moved on to other topics, Sarah returned to her seat. She took notes and participated in discussions about grain imports and communication protocols. She smiled when others made jokes. She thanked speakers who made good points. To anyone watching, she seemed like the same polite diplomat she had always been. But something was different. When the session ended, Sarah walked calmly to her quarters. She sealed the door behind her and activated privacy shields. Then she checked her personal communication device. The message was short and encrypted. It had arrived during the council session. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she read it. Priority Alpha transmission from Terra Command. UES Endeavour located. No survivors. All 50,000 colonists confirmed dead. Crash site analysis complete. Energy weapon signatures match Veltarian military-grade plasma arrays. Debris pattern consistent with deliberate attack, not accident. Full evidence package attached. Authorization given for disclosure at your discretion. Admiral Morrison sends regards. Sarah stared at the message for a long time. The UES Endeavour had been a colony ship that went missing 18 months ago. Everyone assumed it had suffered some kind of technical failure in deep space. Space was dangerous after all. Ships were lost sometimes, but it hadn't been an accident. The Veltarians had murdered 50,000 humans. Men, women, and children. Entire families wiped out. And now they wanted to do the same thing to the outer spiral colonies, just more slowly. Sarah thought about all the times she had smiled and accepted insults. All the times she had said thank you when other species took things that belonged to humans. All the times she had made compromise after compromise, hoping to build trust and friendship. She thought about the children on the Endeavour. Little kids who would never grow up, never see another sunrise, never hug their parents again. All because the Veltarians wanted their mining rights. For 3 years, Sarah had been the perfect diplomat. Patient, understanding, always looking for peaceful solutions. She had followed her instructions from Earth Command to build relationships and avoid confrontation. Those instructions had just changed. Sarah opened a new communication channel to Terra Command. The message she sent was short and direct. Evidence received and confirmed. Request permission to proceed with Protocol 7. Full disclosure recommended. Diplomatic solutions have been exhausted. The reply came back within minutes. Permission granted. All assets are green for your signal. Show them who we really are. Admiral Morrison standing by. Sarah closed the communication device and sat back in her chair. She looked out the small window at the stars beyond. Somewhere out there, human fleets were moving. Ships that other species thought were simple cargo haulers and research vessels. The galaxy was about to learn that humanity had been hiding more than just their feelings. She thought about tomorrow's emergency council session, about the look on Kethvar's face when she showed him the evidence, about the shock of the other species when they realized what the Veltarians had really been doing. But mostly, she thought about those 50,000 dead colonists. They had trusted the galaxy to be civilized. They had believed that species could work together peacefully. They had died because humans had been too polite to properly protect them. Sarah stood up and walked to her closet. In the back, behind, her diplomatic robes and formal wear was a uniform she hadn't worn in 3 years. Black and silver with insignia that no alien had ever seen. The uniform of the Human Defense Command. Tomorrow, the Galactic Council would meet a very different Ambassador Chen. Tomorrow, they would learn that humanity's politeness had been a choice, not a weakness. And tomorrow, the galaxy would discover what happened when humans stopped choosing to be polite. The council chambers felt different when Sarah Chen walked in the next morning. She moved with purpose now, her diplomatic smile nowhere to be seen. The other delegates noticed the change immediately. Even her clothes were different. Instead of her usual soft diplomatic robes, she wore a crisp black uniform with silver markings. Several species whispered among themselves as Sarah took her place at the speaking platform. She had called for an emergency session, something humans had never done before in their 3 years of membership. Kethvar entered with his usual swagger, flanked by several smaller Veltarian officials. He looked annoyed at being called to an unscheduled meeting. His massive form dominated his section of the chamber as he settled into his seat. "Honored delegates," Sarah began, and her voice carried a new edge that made several creatures shift uncomfortably. "I have called this session to present new evidence regarding a matter of extreme importance to the Council." The lights dimmed, and a holographic display appeared above the speaking platform. The image showed twisted metal floating in space, clearly the wreckage of a large ship. 18 months ago, the human colony ship UES Endeavour disappeared en route to the Kepler system. All 50,000 passengers and crew were presumed lost in a navigation accident. Sarah touched a control on her device. The image zoomed in, showing blast holes in the ship's hull. Yesterday, our deep space recovery teams located the wreckage. What they found was not the result of an accident. The display changed to show close-up images of the damage. Precise circular holes punched through thick metal plating. Energy burn patterns that spoke of military weapons, not system failures. "These are plasma cannon impacts," Sarah stated flatly. Military-grade, high-energy weapons, the kind used by warships, not pirates or raiders. A murmur went through the chamber. Several delegates began communicating rapidly with their home, governments through their personal devices. Sarah touched another control. The display now showed pieces of armor embedded in the ship's hull. More interesting are these fragments. Battle armor pieces, blown clear during the attack and embedded in the Endeavor's structure. The armor pieces were clearly marked with Veltarian military symbols. Kethavar shot to his feet, his mandibles clicking rapidly in agitation. This is outrageous. You cannot simply present fabricated evidence and expect— I'm not finished, Sarah said quietly. But her voice cut through Kethavar's protests like a blade through paper. The chamber fell silent. In 3 years, no human had ever interrupted a Veltarian. The other species stared in shock. The energy signatures from the weapons match exactly with Veltarian Dreadnought-class plasma arrays. The attack took place in Grid Section 4A47 Alpha, which Veltarian fleet records show was patrolled by Task Force Omega during that exact time period. Sarah paused and looked directly at Kethavar. Most interesting of all, the attack occurred precisely 72 hours before the Veltarian hegemony announced new mining claims in that system. The chamber erupted in shocked sounds from a dozen different species. The bubble language of the Aquatic Confederation became rapid and high-pitched. The musical tones of the Crystal Collective turned discordant. Even if this evidence is authentic, Kethavar said, his carapace darkening with stress, these are serious accusations that require extensive investigation through proper diplomatic channels. The Council cannot simply— No. The single word dropped into the chamber like a stone into still water. Every delegate froze. We've tried your diplomatic channels for 3 years, Sarah continued. We've been patient. We've been understanding. We've accepted insults, trade disadvantages, and now attempted genocide, all while smiling and asking politely for fairness. She touched her communication device. Computer, connect me to Admiral Morrison at Terra Command. A new hologram appeared, beside Sarah. It showed a grizzled human in military uniform standing on what was clearly a starship bridge. Behind him, crew members worked at control stations. Admiral, Sarah said calmly, please brief the Council on our current status. Admiral Morrison's expression was grim. Certainly, Ambassador. As of 0600 hours this morning, the entire human defense fleet has been placed on full combat alert. All civilian traffic has been cleared from our borders. Our defensive platforms are armed and operational. Several delegates began making distressed sounds. The ethereal consciousness, usually calm and flowing, began flickering rapidly. Admiral, Sarah continued, please also brief the Council on our recent archaeological discoveries. Morrison nodded. 3 weeks ago, our research teams made a discovery on planet designation Kepler 442b. We found the ruins of an advanced civilization that existed approximately 200 years ago. The display changed to show images of destroyed cities and melted structures. The inhabitants called themselves the Aithmori, according to records we've translated. They were a peaceful spacefaring species with colonies on 7 worlds. Morrison paused meaningfully. Energy weapon analysis of the destruction matches the same signatures we found on the Endeavor. The Aithmori were relocated by the Veltarians, permanently. The chamber was now filled with the sounds of panic. Delegates frantically contacted their governments. The implications were staggering. If the Veltarians had been systematically destroying other species, how many civilizations had been wiped out over the centuries? This is conspiracy theory, Kethavar shouted, his voice cracking with stress. The Council cannot allow itself to be manipulated by human warmongering. Sarah turned to look at him, and for the first time her diplomatic mask was completely gone. What the delegates saw in her eyes made several species unconsciously activate their emergency defense systems. We haven't started warmongering yet, she said quietly. The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop several degrees. Admiral, please show them what human warmongering actually looks like. The display changed to show sensor readings from deep space. Hundreds of contacts were moving in perfect formation through the void. This is Human Expeditionary Force Alpha, Morrison explained calmly. 12 carrier battle groups, 36 heavy cruiser squadrons, and our entire rapid deployment Marine Corps. Current destination, Veltarian space. The aquatic representative nearly choked on their breathing fluid. Ambassador Chen, surely you cannot be threatening military action.
Without council approval!
Sarah looked around the chamber at the assembled delegates. Her expression was nothing like the polite diplomat they had known for 3 years. I'm not threatening anything, she said. I'm explaining what's going to happen. The Veltarians will turn over all records relating to their expansion activities over the past 2 centuries. They will submit to a full investigation of their military actions, and they will provide reparations for every species they've eliminated. And if we refuse? Kethvar asked, his voice now barely above a whisper. Sarah's smile returned, but it was nothing like her diplomatic smile. It was cold and sharp, like the edge of a blade. Then you're going to discover why humans went from stone tools to interstellar war fleets in less than 10,000 years. You're going to learn why we conquered our own world before we ever left. She gestured to the display showing the approaching human fleet. You've been mistaking our politeness for weakness. You've been mistaking our patience for stupidity, and you've been mistaking our diplomacy for inability to act. Sarah stepped closer to Kethvar, and despite his massive size, the Veltarian seemed to shrink back. The age of civilized species preying on weaker ones is over. You can adapt to that reality, or you can be removed from it. The choice is yours. The council reconvened 12 hours later. Half the delegates had not left the station, frantically calling their home governments and trying to understand what was happening. The other half wished they had left when they had the chance. Kethvar entered the chamber with 6 of his largest warriors. Their battle armor gleamed under the lights and their weapons were clearly visible. It was meant to be intimidating, a show of strength to remind everyone who really held power in the galaxy. But the woman who faced them was no longer the same person they had bullied for 3 years. Sarah Chen stood at the speaking platform wearing her black uniform, calm and composed. When she saw the Veltarian warriors, she simply nodded as if she had expected them. I see you brought friends, she said mildly. Admiral Morrison, I believe our guests would like a practical demonstration. The holographic display activated, showing Admiral Morrison on his ship's observation deck. Through the massive viewport behind him, the assembled delegates could see something that made several species cry out in alarm. The Veltarian home fleet hung in space. 12 massive dreadnoughts that had been the backbone of galactic law enforcement for 2 centuries. These ships had conquered dozens of worlds and enforced the Council's will across thousands of systems. Watch carefully, Morrison said. Suddenly, space around the Veltarian fleet filled with movement. Ships appeared from nowhere, seeming to materialize out of empty space. Sleek, predatory vessels that dwarfed even the massive dreadnoughts. The human fleet didn't attack. They simply surrounded the Veltarian ships like hunters cornering prey. Our stealth technology, Sarah explained conversationally, is about 200 years ahead of anything else in Council space. We've been watching all of you for quite some time. The chamber filled with sounds of panic and disbelief. The Crystal Collective's musical tones turned harsh and discordant. The ethereal consciousness began flickering rapidly, a sign of extreme distress among their species. But the real demonstration was just beginning. One of the human vessels, a ship the size of a small moon, began to change. Its hull sections moved and reconfigured. Weapon arrays deployed from hidden compartments. What had looked like a simple research vessel transformed into something that made the Veltarian dreadnoughts look like toys. Modular ship design, Sarah continued calmly. Every human vessel can reconfigure for any mission in under 30 minutes. The merchant ships you've seen bringing trade goods, the research vessels studying nebulae, the passenger liners carrying tourists. She paused for effect. They're all warships, every single one. The delegates stared in horror as the implications sank in. For 3 years, humans had been operating what appeared to be a peaceful civilian fleet throughout Council space. In reality, they had been positioning a massive military force under everyone's noses. This is impossible, whispered the Aquatic Confederation representative. No species develops technology this advanced so quickly. You're absolutely right, Sarah agreed. No species does. But then, you never bothered to study human history, did you? A new holographic display appeared, showing Earth's surface. But this wasn't the peaceful blue world most species imagined. This Earth was scarred with the remnants of countless wars, cities built on the ruins of older cities, monuments to the dead stretching across entire continents. We've been fighting wars for our entire existence as a species, Sarah explained. Not just wars against nature or disease, but wars against ourselves. Total wars. Wars that reshaped continents and rewrote the laws of physics. Images flashed across the display. Ancient battles with bronze weapons, medieval sieges, industrial warfare that consumed entire nations, nuclear weapons that could end civilizations. By the time we reached the stars, we had already fought every conceivable type of war. We had tested every weapon, tried every strategy, learned from every defeat. The display changed to show human colonies across dozens of worlds, each protected by hidden defensive networks and ready to mobilize at a moment's notice. When we joined the Council, we had already conquered the most dangerous enemy any species can face, ourselves. Everything else is just practice. Kethavar's warriors were backing away now, their weapons suddenly seeming pathetically small compared to what they had just witnessed. The Veltarian leader himself had gone completely still, his natural camouflage abilities making his skin ripple with stress patterns. The choice is simple, Sarah concluded, her voice carrying absolute certainty. Justice or extermination. Investigation and reparations, or total war. You have 6 hours to decide. As if summoned by her words, alerts began flashing on every delegate's communication device. Reports were pouring in from across Council space. Human fleets were decloaking around every major world, every strategic installation, every military base. The ethereal consciousness spoke first, their voice a whisper of pure energy. How many ships do you have? Sarah's smile was razor sharp. Enough. Admiral Morrison's image leaned forward. Every human colony has a defensive fleet. Every trade route has patrol ships. Every research station has an escort wing. We've been building and preparing for 3 years while you thought we were just being friendly neighbors. But why? Asked the Crystal Collective, their harmonic resonance filled with confusion. Why hide this capability? Why pretend to be weak? For the first time since entering the chamber, Sarah's expression softened slightly. Because we hoped we wouldn't need it. We hoped that joining the Council would mean working with civilized species who valued peace and justice. We hoped that diplomacy and cooperation could solve problems without violence. Her voice hardened again. We were wrong. She gestured to the display showing the Veltarian fleet, now completely surrounded and outgunned. You mistake our desire for peace as inability to make war. You confuse our patience with stupidity. You think that because we smile and compromise, we're incapable of fighting back. Sarah stepped forward, and even through the holographic display, her presence seemed to fill the chamber. Let me be very clear about something. Humans are not pacifists. We're not weaklings. We're not your victims. The display changed one more time, showing the orbital bombardment platforms now visible around every major world in Council space. Weapons that had been disguised as communication satellites and weather monitoring stations. We're the species that turned warfare into an art form and then chose to pursue peace instead. We're the species that built weapons capable of cracking planets and then decided to use that same technology to build gardens. Sarah's eyes swept across the assembled delegates. But children are dead now. 50,000 of them murdered by a species that thought it could prey on the weak with impunity. And that changes everything. The chamber was completely silent except for the quiet hum of life support systems and the rapid, panicked breathing of terrified delegates. 6 hours, Sarah repeated. Choose wisely. 4 hours and 37 minutes later, Kethavar stood before the assembled council. The proud leader who had dominated galactic politics for decades now looked broken. His natural armor had lost its shine, and his movements were slow and careful. In his primary appendages, he held a small crystal device that seemed to weigh more than a mountain. The hegemony of Veltar, he said, each word clearly painful, formally submits to council investigation. We acknowledge our actions regarding the human colony ship Endeavour, and other incidents. Over the past 2 centuries, the crystal device contained the complete military records of the Veltarian hegemony going back 300 years. Every campaign, every battle, every relocation operation. Sarah Chen nodded graciously from her position at the speaking platform. Her diplomatic smile had returned, but now everyone understood what that smile really meant. It wasn't weakness or naivety. It was the controlled expression of a predator choosing not to kill. Thank you, Prime Speaker Kethvar. The human delegation appreciates the hegemony's cooperation in this matter. But cooperation was just the beginning. Over the following weeks, as investigators poured through the Veltarian records, the true scope of their crimes became clear. The galaxy reeled in shock as the evidence mounted. 23 intelligent species had been systematically eliminated over the past 2 centuries. Not just defeated in war or forced to relocate, completely wiped out. Their worlds strip-mined. Their cultures erased, their very existence removed from galactic records. The Ythmori had been scientists and philosophers, known for their beautiful crystal cities and advances in medical technology. The Veltarians had killed every last one of them to claim mineral rights to their home system. The Kethlon had been master shipbuilders whose vessels were considered works of art. When they refused to share their construction techniques, the Veltarians had bombarded their worlds from orbit. The Silvani had been explorers who mapped dozens of new systems. They had been eliminated simply because their expansion routes conflicted with Veltarian territorial claims. Species after species, each destroyed for the crime of being inconvenient to Veltarian ambitions. But the most shocking revelation came from humanity's own intelligence files. During the investigation, Sarah revealed that human forces had been quietly documenting Veltarian atrocities for over a year. Spy satellites had recorded the attacks. Deep space reconnaissance had mapped the mass graves. Intelligence operatives had copied classified documents from Veltarian databases. The humans had known. They had evidence of genocide, war crimes, and systematic extinction campaigns, and they had done nothing. "Why didn't you act sooner?" asked the ethereal consciousness during one of the investigation hearings. Their energy form flickered with confusion and anger. "If you knew they were murdering entire species, why did you wait?" Sarah's answer was simple and devastating. "Because we hoped you would." The words hit the assembled delegates like a physical blow. Humanity had given the Council every opportunity to police itself. They had provided hints, asked pointed questions, and created openings for investigation. They had waited for someone, anyone, to step forward and demand justice for the disappeared species. No one had. "We didn't want to be the galaxy's policeman," Sarah explained to the stunned delegates. "We wanted to be part of a community of civilized species working together for peace and prosperity. We wanted to believe that the Council's ideals meant something." She gestured to the evidence displays covering every wall of the chamber. "We were prepared to give you time to prove us right. Even when we found the first evidence of genocide, we thought maybe it was an isolated incident. When we found the second case, we hoped it was just poor judgment by local commanders. By the time we documented the pattern, we had already started preparations." Admiral Morrison appeared on the display, looking older and more tired than he had days before. "The decision to reveal our capabilities wasn't made lightly," he said. "We've been preparing for this moment for 18 months. Every ship positioned, every system analyzed, every contingency planned. But the attack on the Endeavour changed everything," Sarah continued. "They weren't just killing unknown species from ancient history. They were killing our people, our families." The chamber was silent as delegates absorbed the implications. Humanity hadn't been caught off guard by the revelation of genocide. They had been conducting the largest intelligence operation in galactic history, while everyone else thought they were harmless newcomers. The trial that followed lasted for months. Veltarian officials were paraded before the Council to confess their crimes and provide details of their campaigns. The evidence was overwhelming, the testimonies damning. But it wasn't just the Veltarians on trial. The entire Council system was being judged and found wanting. "How did you not know?" Sarah asked during one session, addressing the assembled delegates. 23 species don't just disappear without anyone noticing. Trade routes don't change overnight. Entire systems don't go silent by accident. The uncomfortable truth was that many species had suspected something was wrong. Strange gaps in historical records, unexplained changes in territory, rumors and whispers about relocated populations. But investigation would have been difficult and dangerous. It was easier to look the other way. The council failed, Sarah stated flatly. Not through malice, but through willful ignorance. You allowed evil to flourish because confronting it would have been inconvenient. The restructuring of galactic government that followed was swift and comprehensive. The old Council of Independent Species was replaced with a new system that included strict oversight mechanisms, mandatory reporting requirements, and most importantly, enforcement powers. The new Galactic Peacekeeping Force was established with humanity providing the majority of ships and personnel, not because they wanted power, but because they had proven they were willing to use it for justice rather than conquest. Regional monitoring stations were established throughout inhabited space, staffed by mixed crews from multiple species and equipped with the most advanced sensors available. No fleet could move undetected. No world could go silent without investigation. Most significantly, a new position was created within the council structure, Chief Arbiter, with the authority to investigate crimes against sentient species and order military intervention when necessary. The position was offered to humanity. Sarah Chen accepted the role with the same quiet dignity she had shown throughout the crisis. We never wanted to rule the galaxy, she told the delegates during her acceptance speech. We wanted to protect it. But we've learned that sometimes protection requires the willingness to fight. She looked out at the assembled representatives of dozens of species, many of whom had spent years dismissing humanity as irrelevant. The age of genocide disguised as politics is over. The age of species preying on the weak is finished. What we build from here depends on whether you choose to be part of the solution or part of the problem. The galaxy had learned a hard lesson about the difference between politeness and weakness. Now it would learn an even harder lesson about the responsibility that came with true civilization. 3 years later, the galaxy was a very different place. Chief Arbiter Sarah Chen stood in the same council chambers where she had once been dismissed and ignored. But now she occupied the central position, overseeing a transformed galactic government that actually functioned. The speaking platform where Kethvar had once announced his genocidal relocations now hosted debates about infrastructure projects and scientific cooperation. The change had not been easy. Many species had initially resented human oversight, seeing it as conquest disguised as peacekeeping. Some had even attempted to form resistance movements, claiming that humanity was just another empire seeking to dominate the galaxy. Those resistance movements had lasted approximately 6 weeks. The problem with opposing human peacekeeping efforts was that humans had spent 3 years preparing for every possible contingency. When the Thorian Confederacy tried to blockade human patrol routes, they discovered that patrol routes was just what humans called their invasion highways. When the Nexus Coalition attempted to jam human communications, they learned that human ships had 17 different backup communication systems. Most educational of all was when the hegemony remnant, what remained of Veltarian forces after the trials, attempted to retake one of their former colonies. The human response had been swift and decisive. A single human cruiser had arrived in the system, broadcast a warning, and then proceeded to disable the entire remnant fleet without firing a single lethal shot. The remnant ships had simply stopped working. Their weapons powered down, their engines went offline, and their life support systems switched to minimum power. The crews found themselves floating helplessly in space, completely unable to control their own vessels. Electronic warfare capabilities, Admiral Morrison had explained to the shocked council afterward. We can take control of any ship in the galaxy remotely. We've been analyzing your computer systems for 3 years while pretending to need technical assistance. After that demonstration, resistance to human peacekeeping efforts effectively ended. But the real change in the galaxy wasn't military. It was cultural. For the first time in centuries, species were working together instead of just avoiding each other. The threat of human intervention had forced cooperation, but the benefits of that cooperation were becoming obvious. Joint scientific projects were producing breakthrough discoveries at an unprecedented rate. The Aquatic Confederation's bioengineering expertise combined with crystalline collective computing power had created medical technologies that could cure diseases across multiple species. Trade routes protected by human patrols had become safer and more profitable than anyone had imagined possible. Most importantly, no species had gone missing in 3 years. Sarah walked through the corridors of the council station, nodding to delegates from dozens of worlds. The ethereal consciousness flickered a greeting as she passed. A group of young crystal beings chimed a musical hello. Even the remaining Veltarians, now reduced to 3-star systems and serving permanent reparations, acknowledged her with respectful bows. She made her way to the memorial hall, a new addition to the station. The walls were lined with holographic displays showing the 23 extinct species. The Ythmori crystal cities gleamed in eternal beauty. Kethlon ships sailed through digital stars. Sylvani explorers planted flags on distant worlds. At the center of the hall stood a simple plaque with names, 50,000 of them, every human who had died on the Endeavor, from the ship's captain to the youngest child in the nursery. Sarah paused before the memorial, as she did every day. These people had died because humanity had tried too hard to be civilized. They had trusted in diplomacy and law when they should have trusted in strength. Their deaths had taught the galaxy that some problems required more than polite conversation to solve. Still thinking about what might have been? Admiral Morrison's voice came from behind her. He approached quietly, his uniform showing the wear of someone who had spent 3 years ensuring that humanity's threats remained credible. Every day, Sarah admitted. If we had acted sooner, they might still be alive. The Ythmori might still be building their crystal gardens. The Kethlon might still be creating beautiful ships, Morrison nodded. And if we had acted differently, the galaxy might be ashes by now. We made the best choice we could with the information we had. They stood together in comfortable silence, 2 humans who had changed the course of galactic history by choosing to stop being polite. The Centauri Collective sent another request today, Morrison said eventually. They want human peacekeeping ships to escort their colony convoys. Apparently, pirates have been harassing their outer systems. Approved, Sarah said without hesitation. How many ships do we need? Just the threat should be enough. Word has gotten around that human patrol ships don't take prisoners when they catch pirates attacking civilian targets. That was true. Humans had developed a reputation for being remarkably reasonable right up until someone crossed certain lines. Attack. Military targets and humans would disable your ships and offer medical assistance to wounded crews. Attack civilians and human ships would simply erase you from existence with no warning and no mercy. The galaxy had learned to appreciate the distinction. Any other business? Sarah asked. The usual. 3 minor territorial disputes that everyone wants us to mediate, 2 trade disagreements that need arbitration, and the annual budget meeting for the peacekeeping force. Sarah smiled, her real smile, not the diplomatic one she had worn for 3 years before everything changed. Remember when our biggest worry was whether we'd get invited to trade conferences? I remember when we thought joining the council would mean making friends, Morrison replied. Turns out it meant becoming the adults in a room full of children. They walked together toward the main administrative complex, passing through corridors that bustled with activity from dozens of species. The station had grown significantly since humanity had taken a central role in galactic affairs. New sections housed the Peacekeeping Force headquarters, the Interspecies Crime Investigation Unit, and the Memorial Archive where the histories of extinct species were preserved. Do you think they'll ever stop needing us to watch them? Morrison asked. Sarah considered the question as they entered her office. The room was furnished simply: a desk, some chairs, and a large window looking out at the stars. On the wall hung 2 items: her original diplomatic credentials from Earth Command and a photo of the Endeavor taken just before its final voyage. I think they're learning, she said finally. The younger species especially. They're growing. Up in a galaxy where genocide has consequences and strength is used to protect the weak instead of exploit them. She sat behind her desk and activated her communication system. Reports flowed in from across human space. Patrol ships checking trade routes, investigation teams following up on suspicious disappearances, diplomatic corps helping species resolve conflicts before they escalated. The question is whether we can teach them to do this themselves, Sarah continued. Whether we can build a system that works even without humans standing over everyone with a big stick. Morrison settled into one of the visitor chairs. And if we can't? Sarah looked out at the stars, thinking of all the worlds now sleeping safely under human protection, families that didn't have to fear midnight raids, children who could grow up knowing that someone was watching out for them. Then we keep carrying the stick, she said simply. For as long as it takes. Her communication system chimed with an incoming message. Sarah read it quickly, then smiled. Good news? Morrison asked. The best. The Silvani Restoration Project just reached a milestone. They've successfully recreated Silvani genetic patterns from archive samples. In 50 years, we might have a viable population again. Morrison grinned. Bringing back the dead, I like it. Not bringing them back, Sarah corrected. Making sure they're never forgotten. Making sure their extinction means something. Outside the window, human patrol ships moved through the darkness, their crews alert and ready. The galaxy was finally at peace, but it was a peace built on the understanding that some people were willing to fight for it. The age of polite diplomacy was over. The age of enforced civilization had begun. And for the first time in galactic history, that might actually be enough.